NFL free agency is slowing down a little bit, but the Colts are staying extremely on brand, including adding a new, very veteran quarterback. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right. Thanks for tuning in and making us your last listen of the night or first listen tomorrow morning. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's show is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off of your first purchase. What up, y'all? This is Jake Arthur and Zach Hicks from horseshoehuddle.com. And we are still talking free agency because the buzz is still going. Now, overall, the deals aren't flying off the shelves like they were on Monday and Tuesday necessarily. Around the league, things are slowing down a little bit, but the Colts continue to add their own. There's a little bit of buzz still about some outside players. But, you know, with Gardner Minshew leaving for the Raiders, the Colts now have their backup quarterback. And that's going to lead us into our first segment today. Joe freaking Flacco, Zach. I don't know. A lot of people saw my my tweet that I put out, I think last night, but just the random assortment of quarterbacks that the Colts have had since the Jim Harbaugh era, really, it's just incredible. Like, did you ever picture that like Joe Flacco would be on the Colts after Phillip Rivers and Matt Ryan? And like, it's incredibly random. Like, our football fandom of like 10, 15 years ago, you could have never pictured what the Colts are doing now.
Yeah, I think what's really funny about this is I can't really speak for like 10 to 15 years ago, obviously, with the Colts. I wasn't, a big Colts fan during the Peyton Manning era and stuff. I unfortunately joined after the Peyton Manning era. But just these last couple of years, the backups that the Colts have just not been normal quarterbacks whatsoever. They have been the craziest quarterbacks, either the quarterbacks with the craziest storylines, the craziest media personalities, just, the craziest Cinderella run quarterbacks. I mean, look, we're looking at Nick Foles a couple years, or the dusted remains of Nick Foles, whatever that was a couple seasons ago, because it really wasn't Nick Foles anymore. But we had Nick Foles in here. We had Gardner Minshew last year, which obviously is beloved by media and fans alike. And he did Gardner Minshew things on the field. And now we get Joe Flacco, who's been a part of two Cinderella runs. I mean, the one obviously with the Ravens, which won the Super Bowl, and the one last year, which unfortunately came up short in the playoffs. And it definitely hit midnight there against the Houston Texans. But it's really fun. I mean, my time covering the Colts, I can always say we've had a lot of really, really fun backup quarterbacks. I mean, when I first came to covering the Colts, we had Jacoby Brissett, who was just a very lovable, fun backup quarterback who was running to the end zone and celebrating defensive turnovers and stuff. And then you obviously go on to these guys. So, yeah, I've really enjoyed the backup quarterbacks we've had in Indy, and Joe Flacco is just added to that long list of really fun, crazy, not normal backup quarterbacks. But look, you know what? When it comes to the backup, it's not going to be a good time when that backup's in there. So might as well have somebody who can sling it around a little bit and give us, some anxiety and some craziness when he's on the field.
Right. The Colts basically, if they're getting what Joe Flacco was doing in 2023, they basically have, sarcophagus Carson Wentz, essentially. but the dude still has an absolute laser. Like he's still getting the ball out. He's ripping it. But I just love the fact that like this dude, he's got like his Murtaugh list. I don't know for you guys who watch How I Met Your Mother or Lethal Weapon, let's cross it over. But he's too old for this. He's too old for all the simple stuff. He went out and was just hucking it around. Like Amari Cooper appreciated it. David Njoku appreciated it. And I mean, he went on a dream run. The guy in 6 games, number one, got them to the playoffs. But he averaged over 320 passing yards per game at 38 years old. And he threw 14 touchdowns, but also 10 picks. Like this guy was just YOLO. I do not care. That's the energy I'm trying to bring to the Colts, because Gardner Minshew, he was careful, but like Joe's gonna let's hope we never have to see him. But I think Joe's just going to pepper it around. But he has that watchdog of Shane Steichen there to kind of rein in the most reckless parts of it, maybe. I don't know. But I overall am fine with this move.
I think Joe Flacco is what everybody thought Gardner Minshew was when the Colts signed. Because I think the moxie that Gardner Minshew has, you think of this gunslinger quarterback who's just going to be reckless and throw it all over the place. But then when you actually watch Gardner Minshew, he's terrified of the pocket. He's skittish. He doesn't have the biggest arm. And it's kind of just like it's like a game manager with moxie is what Gardner Minshew is. Joe Flacco is me playing Madden. Like it's me playing Madden on the hardest difficulty because look, I'll throw for 300 something yards because I just get frustrated and spam 4 verts, but I'll also throw like 20 interceptions a game. I'll throw 20 touchdowns a game as well. And I'll lose games in the 40s or 50s to the 40s and 50s. It's kind of like me playing Madden here where look, at the end of the season, my touchdown interception ratio is not going to be great, but I'm going to throw for the NFL record in yards. That's kind of what Joe Flacco is, what he got in the field last year, where it was just slinging it, doing a lot of crazy things. I mean, some of the throws he made last year when I was watching some of the film, you could probably put them up there with like the best throws in the NFL last season. And you're saying, yeah, like these are NFL quarterback, these are elite NFL quarterback throws. But then when you look at some of the interceptions, it's like, why were you not setting your feet? Why were you throwing to the triple covered receiver down the field when your check down was wide open? Why are you doing these things? And it's a reason why he's not a starting quarterback still, even though he was throwing for 320 yards a game last year in the 6 games he played. The reason why nobody wanted to give him a starting offer, besides, the fact that he's 39 years old, is because he wasn't really operating like a legit quarterback. It was really just reckless abandon throwing the ball. But look, when we're talking about backup quarterbacks, it's fun to have that. It's fun to have a guy who can give you a chance if he ever steps on the field. And look, at the end of the day, I'm not going to say he's going to come in and be like a perfect mentor to Anthony Richardson, because Flacco has made it very clear in the past that he's not really looking to be a mentor. He's just there to play football. But just being somebody where when Richardson shows up in the morning, he sees a guy who is an NFL guy who's been in the NFL for a long time, just going about his business. Or even if you're in the film room, just something that Flacco points out and sees on the film, like, I think that's a valuable aspect of what he brings to the room. It doesn't have to be like a pure mentorship type thing where I'm going to take you under the wing and show you everything I know, but just being around a guy who's been in the NFL for, since I was in elementary school. I do think there is value to having that kind of guy in the room and having another person who, look, he's older than the head coach. He's older than our head coach here in Indy. So just having a guy with that much NFL experience just brings a lot of value to the room. So for a team that has a coaching staff that's so young, for a team that has an offense that's so young, having a veteran who has more years in the NFL than some of these guys, even have alive, it feels like it's nice to have that kind of veteran in the room, even if he's not going to be like the quote unquote mentor that everybody's looking for.
And I'm glad you mentioned that because so Joe was on the Pat McAfee show today, Thursday. And so I watched the segment that he was on, and Pat asked him about that because Joe's caught a bad rap before. Like when the Ravens drafted Lamar Jackson, he was like, "I'm not here to show him the ropes," blah blah blah. And he's like, just to kind of clarify, it's not that I refuse to help anybody or anything. I'm just not necessarily going out of my way and taking them under my wing. Now I'll lead by example. And like we spend a ton of time together in the quarterback room. Like I'll talk about what I'm seeing and this and that, but like, I'm not going to have them on my hip 24/7. It's up to Anthony, which we all know his work ethic is second to none. It's up to Anthony to observe what Joe's going to be doing. And that Shane is going to, I don't even think he's going to have to nudge him, but like they will know very well that they want Anthony to watch what Joe's doing. Cause when did he come in the league? Like 2009 or something? Like he's been in the league for a minute.
I want to say it was 2008 out of Delaware. I want to say it was like a 2nd round pick, 3rd round pick or something.
So a guy who's quite literally seen everything. He's played with the best, like the wealth of knowledge that's in him. I mean, that's up to Anthony to kind of tap on that. And I have no doubts that he will.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I think this is a good pairing, and it gives Steichen a quarterback he trusts behind the starter, gives him the veteran experience. And look, if he gets on the field, which I hope he never takes a snap for the Indianapolis Colts, but if he does, you know what? We'll have some fun with it. We'll have a lot of fun with it like the Browns did last year. So I like this signing. And it's not really that expensive either, 4.5 guaranteed.
Mhm.
Not a bad signing at all. I really like this one.
Yeah, and it's only up to 8.7 based on, factors that the Colts hope don't come into play, but they just saw their backup play most of the season. So 4.5 guaranteed, it's probably not going to get anywhere near the 8.7 that it's up to maximized. But yeah, I think it's a very team-friendly deal. Unfortunately for him, he kind of made it sound like there wasn't a huge market out there for him. But this was a good situation for him, having played with Shane, and the Colts are kind of a young up and coming team. So coming up here in a minute, we're going to talk about some of the other moves that the Colts have made, because as we know, they just want to keep bringing their own guys back and running it back, and they've done it a few times. We'll kind of check in and see, where are they roster wise, where are they cap space wise. Buying tickets to your favorite events should not be stressful. You're supposed to be going there to have fun. So Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. And with killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun that you're actually going to have. I personally love Gametime because if I feel like being spontaneous, going to a show, I mean, the weather is getting warmer, so there's going to be concerts constantly. Indy has a ton of great venues. If I just feel, if my wife and I don't have any plans that weekend, I can go right to Gametime and see 5 to 10 different things around the city that we can do. And for those of us around Indy, we know it's truly the city that never sleeps. Am I right? But it's Gametime is the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. Get images of your seat before you buy so that you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Buy tickets in a matter of seconds, 2 taps, all set. Tickets are sent directly to your phone as well, so you don't have to dig through your email while you're in line and there's a million people behind you, which makes you start to sweat, and then you are already not having a good time going into the venue. So snag those tickets without the stress with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And as you know, because we love to tell you, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel, Locked On Sports Today. Baseball fans, mark your calendars for March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern for the best MLB season preview, coming exclusively to Locked On Sports Today. Again, on March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern time, be the first to get local insight from the MLB local experts of the Locked On Podcast Network. Find it on March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern for the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. All right, so let's get back to the Colts here. So in the past day or so, they have made a few more moves internally, brought back Ronnie Harrison, the safety linebacker hybrid. Still don't know what their plan for him is. He was still listed as a safety on the press release. But Jannard Avery, edge defender, who unfortunately never made it into the season. He suffered a knee injury during the summer that caused him to go on IR. And then running back Trey Sermon, another one-year deal. All 3 of those guys were one-year deals. Decent season, came in for relief. Jonathan Taylor got banged up. Zach Moss got banged up. Averaged 4.6 yards per carry on the season. Obviously, him and Tyler Goodson had that big week against the Steelers. So that's a nice little move. I mean, we know the Colts aren't going to do a whole lot behind Jonathan Taylor. He's their workhorse. But Sermon's a nice player to have.
Yeah. Sermon's going into a really big offseason for himself here, because regardless of what the Colts do at backup running back, if they draft another guy, if they bring in an undrafted free agent, or even if they sign, an outside guy to compete with him in camp, he has a chance to really solidify himself as RB2 in training camp. So if he comes out, maybe a little bit slimmed down, a little bit quicker and stuff like that, and really, takes that position, it could be a really big year for him. We saw what Zach Moss was able to do last year as the RB2 going into camp. He had over 700 yards and turned that into a starting role with the Cincinnati Bengals for this next season. So A really, really big offseason coming up for him. He looked good in limited time last year. And we could see some good things from him. Ronnie Harrison, yeah, there was a lot of confusion with whatever the heck he was in the press release. Safety, linebacker. I know Adam Schefter put out there safety linebacker hybrid when he put his thing out there. Hopefully it stays at linebacker. I'd prefer him at linebacker than safety. I think he would probably prefer it at linebacker too, considering that he played better at linebacker last year. So if he's coming back for pass coverage, linebacker depth, I think that's a really good sign. And then Jannard Avery was a guy we talked about a lot during the preseason last year because it was really looking like he was going to be their like off the bench speed rusher. And when he went down with his injury, it ended up being Jacob Martin, who came in and became that role, and as well as Isaiah Land. So it seems like to me going into camp this year, we're going to have Avery, Isaiah Land, Titus Leo, and then maybe if they bring somebody else in, all of those guys competing for those reserve speed rusher roles that are, they're kind of game day inactive sometimes, but also against pass heavy teams, they come out there and get a couple snaps. So, Avery's got another big camp coming up. Hopefully he can stay healthy. But I mean, you were out there at all those practices last year. Avery looked pretty good in the time that you saw him, right?
Yeah, if I remember correctly, there was more than a few times that I mentioned, he was roughing up the 13 O line and getting would-be sacks and things like that. I remember jotting his name down quite a few times. So I was excited about him playing because I remember liking him coming into the draft. He was a guy that when he came into the NFL, he was one of those, am I a linebacker? Am I an edge guy? He finally settled in as an edge guy in the NFL. And so we thought it was going to be a nice little role for him with the Colts, but just unfortunately wasn't able to do it. But I think it speaks volumes that the Colts actually brought him back after that because they didn't have to. Like, they could have just moved right on. They got Isaiah Land, they got Jacob Martin. They could have gone that way. So the Colts are clearly excited about what he could offer too.
Yeah, for sure. One thing we did want to touch on, though, in this segment too, guys, before we moved on to our final segment today, is where the Colts roster is at right now and what they can really do the rest of the offseason. So by Jake's roster count, by going to the Colts site, he has them at 71 players, 72 if you count Drew Ogletree. We'll say 71 with 72 because we don't really know exactly how he factors in there. Over the cap has them with 31 million in cap space, but we want to remind you guys they don't have the Flacco deal in there yet. They don't have the Kenny Moore deal in there, and they also don't have the cap savings by putting in the Michael Pittman Jr. extension. So there's a lot of ways that can move. I would guess there's still maybe a touch over 20 million in cap space. It could be anywhere from 18 million to 30 million still, depending on what they want to do. And obviously there's still a lot of room with making more space. They could extend DeForest Buckner, which would give them a ton of space the rest of this year. They could restructure Quentin Nelson. They could cut Mo Alley Cox. Like, those are some ways they could really save some space. So if you're banking on them making another big move and you're kind of concerned about the salary cap, they have plenty of space to do it. But the one thing I do want to talk about is with the roster count being at 71/72, whatever the heck it is with that, there's not many roster spots available this offseason. Their draft class is going to be 7 at a minimum. It might, maybe they move up, but probably not. It'll be 7 at a minimum, could be up to like 10 or 12 like we've seen. And then they usually add a good 10 plus undrafted free agents. If they were to do that like their normal thing, they'd be at their roster cap of 90 just by doing that. So I could see maybe 1 to 2, maybe 3 outside free agents brought in still until the draft, but it's not going to be many more outside free agent moves by the Colts. I think a big part of this offseason was just retaining their own and not really adding too much,
Yeah, it's created an interesting scenario going into the draft, which again, there's a month and a half until the draft, but I mean, by this point, you kind of get the vibe of what they're trying to do with free agency. I do imagine we could see a couple of their positions of need addressed, which we'll get more in depth with in the next segment. But yeah, I'm not expecting any flurry, even of the bargain bin stuff that I think a lot of people are expecting. I think they'll probably make a couple more impactful moves, and that's probably about it.
Yeah, I could see, we're going to talk about in our final segment coming up, I could see a safety move or a cornerback move, but I don't really see much more than that. But yeah, coming up, guys, we're going to make our plea to Chris Ballard to, look, I get it. You don't have much more roster space and you want to go into the draft with the guys you have, but please sign us a corner and or a safety before the draft. Please, Chris, we need to do it. We're going to talk about that here in our last segment. But first, did you know that even if you have 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. So this offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of the first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member specific. SIPC is a registered broker dealer. All right, guys. So to close out today's show, we're going to make our plea to Chris Ballard. We can't go into this next season with the cornerback and safety room looking the way they are. And look, the one solution is not just sign Julian Blackmon and go into the next season with that, because we saw last year the Colts were the 28th ranked defense in total yards allowed, and points allowed was not great either. And you can't go into this next season with the same exact secondary. Like, yes, there is the draft. There is the draft for sure. But if you go into the draft with the current cornerback room that you have, you are essentially forcing the pick at 15 to be a cornerback no matter what. And you're not adding more explosiveness. You're not adding another young player to your offense because you're forcing corner at 15. And then you might be forcing safety in the second round if you're not signing a safety as well. So I'm not trying to get all doom and gloom. I'm not trying to say that the Colts are having this horrendous offseason, because retaining Grover Stewart and Kenny Moore and Michael Pittman Jr., those are massive wins. And I think that that's a good thing for the Colts. But if they don't make that one more move, which is bringing in a veteran safety or signing a veteran corner and or signing a veteran corner or making that big move for L'Jarius Sneed, whatever it's going to be, if they don't make those extra moves, you're just going to be carrying the exact same team from last year into next year, and you're going to have the exact same problems, even if you take a corner at 15. Like, you could take a legit Pro Bowl caliber player at 15 who's on their rookie contract and who's a rookie. But again, that youth and inexperience is going to show up quite a bit, and you're not really going to make that big of a push. You need to get a veteran in here, especially at corner, but also at safety. And you just need more talent on the back end on your defense. There's still plenty of time, but like, I don't know, Jake, every time I see like a Kendall Fuller come off the board, every time I see, Dane Jackson off the board, again, not a great corner or anything like that, but every time I see these corners just coming off the board and I see these safeties coming off the board, I start whittling down my nails a little bit, to the point where I'm, my bandaged up finger again because I'm biting my nails so much. But, it's a little concerning. Don't you think, Jake?
Yeah. And I think the reason we have kind of conditioned ourselves to stay concerned about it is every offseason there is at least one position group that is clearly weak and needs to be addressed, and it doesn't get adequately addressed. And then they go into the season, Chris and or Shane, whoever is the head coach at the time, are like, you know what, we like what we've got. And then we're all like, I don't know. And then at the end of the season press conference, Chris is like, yeah, I wish I would have done something about that. And then he overcorrects the next year. So, last year, I think I forget what it was. I think it was offensive line depth was one area we screamed about, and they were right about it. But I think the secondary is very clearly what everyone is screaming for right now. And I think people are right to be concerned about it. Depth purposes. And again, like, the defense was not great last year. It was not productive. And so you can't just say, we're counting on the guys who got hurt to come back healthy and then we'll be fine, because that's not going to fix everything. And that pass rush and coverage work hand in hand. You have to help each of those out, because the Colts know, despite having those 51 sacks, something was missing. there was some inconsistency. The inconsistency was likely caused by the issues in the secondary. If you are locking up receivers and pass catchers a little better, that's probably how your pass rushers get to the backfield better. So you just got to do something about it. And it doesn't have to be a L'Jarius Sneed huge splash trade. It just has to be somebody capable of playing starting reps.
Yeah. Years ago, they brought in Rodney McLeod. That was a good veteran safety who you got for a very low deal, and he came in and solidified your safety role. Or you could also, again, they waited until April to get Stephon Gilmore a couple of years ago as well, and Gus Bradley's first season, and that drastically changed the course of the entire defense. And look, Gilmore's back out there. You can still make that April type move. And again, I'm saying all this because I'm not trying to freak out right now. I really am not. I'm just trying to make sure that my stance on this is out there, which is there needs to be something at these positions. I don't care how great the player is. It doesn't have to be this elite superstar play. It doesn't have to be L'Jarius Sneed, like you said. It can be a Steven Nelson. It can be, that caliber of player, just a starting caliber player. But it just can't be a whole season of Darrell Baker Jr. again at corner, or even Jalen Jones. I like Jalen Jones a lot, but it just can't be another season of Jalen Jones, or even Dallas Flowers. I think there's some positive things with him, but again, coming off an Achilles injury, there's some fear there. It can't be Rodney Thomas at safety again. All these things concern me. And another thing that concerns me with Chris Ballard is we've seen this in past drafts where he feels really good about a position group going into the draft, so much so that he will neglect any free agent or outside addition at that position group going into the draft, and it pigeonholes him on who he has to take in the draft. So back in 2020, when we're going into that draft, I don't think the Colts had a first round pick that year. But they didn't really do anything at wide receiver too. It was just T.Y. Hilton, and there was no other wide receivers, and it forced their hand to take Michael Pittman Jr. at 34. Now, Pittman Jr. turned out great. It's awesome. So it worked, but it put a lot on his shoulders there in year one. Then you go to 2021, the edge rush depth that the Colts had going into the draft was like Ben Banogu and Kamoko Toure, two guys who are not in the NFL anymore. And they were going to be the starters for the Colts, and it pigeonholed them to take Kwity Paye and Dayo Dengbo super early in that draft. Last year at cornerback, it pigeonholed them to take 3 corners in that draft, because if they didn't, it would have been Kevin Tolliver and Darrell Baker Jr. starting the entire season. So again, the point of free agency isn't to go out there and get the super A signing, top tier guys and pay them $30 million a year. But for me, free agency needs to be used as a way to plug every hole with at least something. So when you go into the draft, you can take stuff for the long term. You can take players that you don't need to put out there from day one and say, hey, you have to be a starting caliber player right now, or else our season's not going to look very good. That's putting a lot on a young player, and that's putting a lot on a Juju Brents when he gets out there. It's putting a lot on a Kwity Paye his rookie season, putting a lot on a lot of these guys. And I just don't want it to be that situation again where, say they take Quinyon Mitchell at 15. Hey, Quinyon, you have to go be our number one corner out the gate, because if you're not, it comes down to Jalen Jones and Darrell Baker Jr. again. And again, look, I know it's early. We're a couple days into free agency, and I'm not getting too freaked out, because there's a lot of veteran corners and a lot of veteran safeties still out there, and they could still make a move by draft time, by mid-April even. But it is something that I want to put out there where it's look, there has to be something at defensive back. It really can't be, we liked our guys and we like these guys we got in the draft. It can't just be a bunch of, 22, 23, 24-year-olds leading the way again, because it hasn't worked in recent seasons.
Yeah. And just like you said, it's not that you shouldn't enter the draft with any needs, because if you need a quarterback or a left tackle or a top edge or something, you can't always address that in free agency.
Right.
But the needs they have right now are very addressable, to where maybe you need some long-term solutions, but make it to where you don't need anything this year. And that's, to me, that's exactly what you're saying. You don't want to put too much of an onus on these young players. Let there be competition, make it so they don't have to be the guy right away. So I'm right there with you. And with that said, like you mentioned, the safety and cornerback groups are still pretty good. Safety, it's not moving very much at all. It's still very top heavy. Jordan Whitehead is about the only bigger guy that's really come off the board recently in terms of safeties, or one of them. Cornerbacks still, Kendall Fuller went off the board today to Miami after they released Xavier Howard. But cornerback is still pretty decent. Steven Nelson, I think, is probably my top get for them. A guy that can kind of move around and kind of a consolation prize if you're not going to get a Kendall Fuller. So there's still some guys out there, and there's really not many of these guys that you add that you have to guarantee their role. Like if you draft Terrion Arnold or Quinion Mitchell and they win outright that role, you're not they're not replacing Xavier Howard or L'Jarius Sneed or something. Like they're beating out a respectable veteran, because like in free agency, sometimes you have to guarantee types of roles, or very, very much lean into the fact that, yeah, you're probably going to be the starter. And, there are kind of guarantees and nudges that come along with those things.
Yeah. The last thing I'll say before we get out of here, though, is I'm all on board with taking like a Quinion Mitchell or a Terrion Arnold at 15. But I just don't want to have to take them at 15. That's my big thing. Or I'm okay with taking a Tyler Nubin in round 2 at safety. I just don't want to have to take it in round 2 at safety. Don't make it so we have to take these guys early. Make it so when we take them, it's because they're the best player there. That's the biggest thing for me. Before we get out of here, though, today, guys, I do want to remind you that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every single league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on free Fire TV channels app. And also, guys, before we get out of here, the Indy Draft Guides pre-orders are still open for $8.99 with code DRAFTMISS. You get access to an essential piece of reading for Colts fans both before and after the draft, featuring 225 in-depth scouting reports, features, and much more. Click the link in our show notes to pre-order today. And if you guys don't already, make sure you're following at Locked On Colts, at Jake Arthur NFL, and at Zach Hicks 2, all on Twitter. Also, subscribe to us on YouTube, wherever you listen to your podcast. We love your guys' ratings, reviews, and we'll catch you guys back here super late at night because it's free agency, but we'll catch you guys back here late at night tomorrow.